Fast and flowy or technical and demanding?
I think these days fast and flowy, but there was a day technical was good.
Two-stroke or
Still
four?
is. 4.
Tear-offs or roll-offs?
Tear off.
Live or dead engine start?
Live.
Which event venue would you like to revive? Carlsbad Raceway or the Blackwater 100?
Definitely Carlsbad.
Motorcyclist or Dirt Rider magazine?
Well, favor probably would have been on the dirt rider side.
What's your name and where are you from?
Bob Weber. Been in California since 1990 here, and then my dad was military, and I was all over the world.
Welcome to Moto Adventure Unscripted, a weekly podcast about motorcycles, travel, outdoor, and adventures. I'm your host, Drew Faulkner. Mark joins me today as we both talk with Bob Weber from 6D Helmets. If you're curious about what do ECE, FIM, and Snell safety standards mean, if you want to know about Omni-Directional Suspension with regard to helmets, or want to hear about the new Max Goggle from 6D, this is the episode you don't want to miss. As usual, we want to hear from you, the listeners. Hit us with emails, moto80vr@gmail.com. Even better, leave comments here on Spotify so other people can get involved in the show. Wherever you're listening, grab your beverage of choice, turn it up, and we hope you enjoy the show. All right, so we've got Bob on the line here from 6D Helmets. I really appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to talk with us today, Bob.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you do us a favor? Can you, for listeners who are unfamiliar with you, can you give us the elevator pitch? Who is Bob Weber?
Oh gosh, I just a two-wheel enthusiast, bicycles, motorcycles. Lived in Louisiana before we went to Belgium. My next door neighbor was the top enduro guy in the state, a guy named Cliff Norris. He's an amazing rider, and I just wanted to be him. My dad came home one day from work and said, "We're moving to Belgium." And I'm like, okay, what state is that? That's not ringing a bell. And we were off to Mons, Belgium, where NATO headquarters is. And my father worked for one of the generals there. He was an Air Force colonel and a pilot, flew B-52s, B-47s. My older brother, I've got a brother that's 4 years older than me, also a pilot. He and I just got into moto, and we put our bicycles on the train, go to the nearest city of the GP, watch the races. We were at the Belgian Grand Prix when Jim Pomeroy won the first 250 Belgian Grand, or first American to win a European Grand Prix, and we were there that day. And anyways, loved my experience over there. We came back to Nebraska. I was in Nebraska for 2 years. That's where I started racing motocross. And then the family moved to Connecticut, and my dad was teaching the Air Force ROTC at UConn. I think I was going into my junior year of high school, and I started racing in New England, became a local expert up there after a year of racing, and then I raced until 1990 when I moved. I was kind of a 5th through 10th place guy in New England expert class back in the day with JoJo Keller and John Dowd, Doug Henry, Joe Waddington, Jimmy Meenan. There's a slew of talent that came out of New England, and then it was time to move to California. I ran the parts department at Manchester Honda, a pretty prominent dealership in Connecticut and on the moto scene back east, and had a little shock business on the side. But basically when it was time to get serious about a career that wasn't racing, I moved to California to work for White Brothers. I spent some time with Tom White, about 4 years. Let's see, I left. I went to Peterson Publishing. I was in the publishing business for about 8 years. Was promoted to the publisher role after 2, I think. Tom asked me to come back, I think in 2000, and run his company. He had sold the business and thought I would be a good guy to run it. which I was excited to get out of publishing. It was just changing radically with, the onset of the web and all the capabilities of online marketing. And I was kind of a hard parts guy anyways. I left, went to work for Tom. Wasn't really working for Tom. I discovered that pretty quickly, that I was working for the investment team that, bought the company, and they didn't like my management style and I didn't like theirs. And I made it about 13 months and was kicked down the road. So Troy ended up calling me. I ended up going to work for Troy. I actually was going to start my own consulting business, was my thought at the time. And Troy called, was working on a helmet, having some problems. We made a little deal to kind of build the business plan and work on that. Before I presented that to him and his team, I shared some of my other observations about the company that I learned in the process. And that just ended up turning into a job opportunity, or a job. And Troy and I worked together for almost 9 years. And I left in the end of 2010, and we started 60 in May of 2011, really, is when we incorporated the name of the company and got started.
And let me circle back to that, because I don't think everybody knows. You meant Troy Lee Designs, right?
Yes, Troy Lee Designs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's probably some listeners that wouldn't have picked up on that right away, so I want to make sure we mention that.
Yeah.
You led right to where I was going, because I was going to ask you what drives a person to come from racing motorcycles to work in publishing to suddenly go, you know what, I think I'm going to start a helmet company. How does that work?
It's publishing part was interesting because somebody kind of thought I'd be a good fit in that job, and I didn't know the first thing about publishing or advertising. I was kind of a products guy, parts guy, racer, but I did very well at it, and I was promoted rapidly, and I grew the business a lot. We were sold twice in the time I was there, and so I went through those painful, changes of ownership and business models and yada yada yada. I really enjoy the product side of the business, and that was what was so fun about my time at White Brothers. When I first went there, I interviewed with Tom at the Cincinnati trade show, and or actually I gave him my resume there, and then he asked me to come interview. That's that June, and then he hired me in September. He offered me the job when I was there, and I started in September of that year, 1990. So my wife and I moved from Connecticut out here at that time. And then, publishing, back to White Brothers, booted out of there, on to Troy Lee. Troy and I had a lot of fun together. We started the race team together. I had a relationship with Honda, and Wardy and McGrath and Troy wanted to go do some supermoto racing. And so we put that whole thing together and rounded up some money from sponsors. And I one point recall just, Troy, we sell motocross gear, dude. There's not a lot of business here in the supermoto side, although we were selling product for sure. But we had everything we needed to go to Supercross, and 6 of the nine West Coast events were in the backyard. And so it was pretty easy to rope the money together and, get the resources, hire some riders, and start racing Supercross, which then turned into motocross. And a lot of fun. We did a lot of cool stuff together. And I think by the end, Troy and I are just really different people. I love him to death, and we have a great relationship still today. He's, got a creative mind that's just off the charts, as everybody knows. But after that amount of time, we were butting heads a little bit, and it was just time to do something different. And he let me go. It was just the end of it, So it was like, okay, what am I going to do? Go run somebody else's company or start something on my own? And noodling through the helmet situation again was where I came up with the idea for the omnidirectional suspension, which is the foundation of our product in the genesis of 6D.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out where the best place is to pivot there, because to some degree I want to talk to you like, hey, you guys are offering a lot of new technology. So what's been the biggest challenge of getting your product in front of a new group of people?
Um, I look back on it now, and what's it been, 15 years? I can't believe it's gone by that quickly. I also don't think you could really do it again today. It'd be really hard. We failed on the on the street bike side of the equation. Just that buyer is not thinking they're going to have an accident. So the technology is not so important to that person. And we invested a lot of time and money in that product. And, Kyle Wyman's been racing our helmets since day one, and, won the Harley Baggers class. And, he's just been amazing. Among other guys, Sammy Halbert's been in the helmet from the beginning and dirt track. But it's just been hard. Our product resonated in the moto environment. You fall off your dirt bike, you want to get back on it and get going. I was very fortunate to have had a relationship with Ziggy, Rick Ziegfelder from Factory Connection. So when we first started, he was one of not my first phone call, but when it came to marketing and time to figure out how we're going to get it in front of people, I called Rick and said, hey, I've been working on a new helmet here for over a year, and it's really going to be great. And I'd love to, if there's an opportunity, work with you guys. And that just turned into, okay, go get it on Eli. If Eli likes it, we'll put it in front of the rest of the team. And that was a really fun and exciting trip. Robert and I, my founding partner, Robert Reisinger, who was the engineer on the project, we flew to Eli's ranch and spent 2 days there. And he went back and forth from his Shoei and ours a couple of times, and then he never took it off again. And he called me as we were driving back he actually sent me a text as we were driving back to the airport, and he said, hey, work it out. I want to wear that at Monster Energy Cup. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. That's a little fast, but we'll be ready for Anaheim 1, And then just launching the company at the Geico headquarters, having Will Hahn and Zach Osborne and Justin Bogle and Eli, in the helmet, not to mention, the amateur kids, Zach Bell, and gosh, I forget some of them now, but that just gave us instant credibility. And then, quite truthfully, Zach Bell's crash at the Supercross, February of 2013, we were at the Indianapolis Trade Show and had our first booth, and we were talking to dealers. And that night there was a big viewing party, and Zach hole shots his heat race and snags his foot on scrubbing a big jump, and basically fell 30 feet out of the air to flat, hard concrete ground, basically. And I'm like, well, we're out of business, because he didn't look like he was getting up. And before they came back from commercial, one of the mechanics had texted me and said he's up under his own power. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't believe it. And Scott, our sales guy at the time, he got a text that moment from a dealer that said 12 helmets Monday morning, please. And so, yeah, that's how it started. And, it's been nothing but up since then. We're selling all over the world. Most of our sales come from the off-road community. Bicycle is growing all the time for us. We've got really good bicycle products with our tech in it. But I guess that's a somewhat Reader's Digest version of how we got to this moment. There's a lot of other in between, but that's how we got started.
Wonder how many of our listeners even remember Reader's Digest, first of all, but when you mentioned falling out of the sky 30 or 40 feet when he had that crash, people don't realize when they're watching Supercross just how massive those jumps are if you ever have the opportunity to get down on the track and walk that track and see just how massive those jumps are. I mean, to fall 40 feet out of the sky and then get back up and shake it off pretty much and walk away, that's an impressive feat right there.
There's millions of views on that crash on YouTube. It still gets played. Yeah, it's insane. And the funny thing, or the maybe irony, I don't know, but one of our investors lives in Indianapolis. So we raced out of the trade show. We were back at his house. We just sat down. We popped open a beer. We're on the couch. We're all excited. And then that happens. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't even believe it, you know. But anyways, yeah, it turned out it was really great. And, you know, our product's very good. Our tech is very good. That was validated in 2016 when the NFL put out a call to the industry for a better material solution for helmets. They didn't say it was for helmets, but everybody knew it was for helmets. We were one of 120 firms that applied for this grant that was that they were offering. It was $500,000, and they whittled that down to 20. They allowed 20 of us to send our product in, and then 5 of us were selected to go through a 1-year development program. And when we saw they got us all together, they showed us everybody's material. We had 25 millimeters to work with, you know, about an inch. And one of them, the University of Michigan, had about 40 millimeters. I'm like, well, that's not fair. You know, we had 25. How'd they get in with 40? But
there's a Michigan joke here.
Well, I just figured they must have something really good that, you know, okay, that they want to, you know, include this. But anyway, long story short, they gave us 50 millimeters for the challenge the following, you know, the year of development. And we won the whole thing with our ODS. In fact, this was the little puck that was the kind of the winning solution at the end. But you can see how easily it displaces in rotation, you know. But then it's got this really soft, compressive nature to it. And that's what our technology is doing in the helmet. We have a really soft, intermediate layer that provides good low energy performance. It ramps it into the high energy. And then it's also got freedom to displace in, you know, basically 6 degrees of freedom, which is where our company name came from, the 6D.
And that's a great segue, because that's where I wanted to head next, was kind of into helmet technology and safety. Did you want to unpack omni-directional suspension any deeper than the description you offered us just now?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot over the years. The first helmet, the ATR-1, had 27 little hourglass dampers in it. In fact, my other little prop here, you can see those little dampers in here. They look like little hourglasses, and they allowed it to do the same thing, right? So very progressive as you compressed it. But like your helmet's made out of this EPS, your helmet liner. You can't squeeze that with your hands. You know, it works by crushing. And so the energy's got to get pretty high up the scale before it starts to give way. And then when it gives way, it gives a nice linear crush and does a good job of mitigating that force. The problem is, because helmets are small, the density of the EPS is high to withstand the high energy impacts. They're not doing much down low. So by adding this system of a suspended liner in there, we changed all the dynamics of the helmet, giving a much better, we kind of referred to it as broad range. We started at the bottom, and it just progressively goes into the high end and gives us everything we need to pass the standards. So this was in the ATR-1, and then the ATR-2, this is actually a cutaway of a 3. But there's less dampers in the current technology. And it's still basically, it's the way I like to define it, it's really a helmet inside of a helmet, because this liner right here is the inside EPS, and it's completely uncoupled from the outer liner and shell, and it can displace in rotation just like I was showing with this thing.
Yeah.
It's got this cap on it that reduces friction. It disperses. Also, it's a load disbursement component, so that where the dampers are, now we use these damper towers. You might be able to see them here a little bit. They're kind of cut through the middle. But this outside layer is EPP. It's really soft. Okay, so if you can see, I don't know how well
it's working
viewer
pretty
might
good.
be able to see
and for
it,
the
but
listeners' benefit, here on Spotify you can actually watch the video. So
yeah, that's really soft. It does the low energy work, and then this comes into play and does the high energy work. And we designed it so we could easily replace this, because the EPP will outlive the helmet. Basically, it's kind of indestructible. Little gas bubbles that don't pop. These are little gas bubbles that pop. So once you yield the EPS, it's no longer the same. That's why everybody's helmets are one and done. With our solution, this inside EPS is replaceable, and we do that here in the office, or we've got licensed distributors around the world that can do it also. And then the helmet, as long as the shell's good, the helmet's back to brand new condition. It might not look brand new, but functionally it's back to new condition. So omnidirectional suspension is just that. That's the name we came up, because it just defines what it does. It's free to displace in 3 dimensions, in 3-dimensional space, however it needs to, and kind of works like a ball and socket, in there, and just scrubs off rotational acceleration and reduces the linear accelerations. If you go study the graphs, like the impact graphs of our helmets compared to traditional designs and some of the other helmets with technology in them, you'll see graphs that are still really straight up. The accelerations are really extreme. Our curves are a lot softer. They're lower. There's less jerk in the equation, less change in acceleration at a high amount. So it's a really good system.
Where does the 6 degrees come into that? I'm trying to make the correlation from, you mentioned earlier your name 6D, 6 degrees of freedom. Where does that play into that system you just explained?
So 6 degrees of freedom is basically an engineering term that allows something to translate in 3-dimensional space across the X, Y, and Z coordinates.
Okay.
So it's funny, my brother, the pilot, when we were sitting here trying to figure out what we were going to call the company, it was like, okay, it's Bob and Robert's Excellent Helmet Company, or, what's it going to be,
You took
my brother
name.
started, my brother started talking about, well, man, it's really 6 degrees of freedom that, we're talking about here. And we started talking about 6D, and I go, gosh, I kind of like it. My racing number back in New England, just by happenstance, I guess, ended up being, 6. I used to, that was my number back in New England. And
Nice.
I go, well, I kind of like that. And, and so that's where it came from. 6 degrees, it stands for 6 degrees of freedom. And that's basically what the technology does. It has the ability to gimbal around inside of itself and displace and scrub off those accelerations.
And what kind of gave you the inspiration for that entire idea, right? Like, it's one thing to go, okay, I'm going to design a new helmet company, but you're talking about some pretty complicated sounding ideas being built into a helmet, which is, like you said earlier, a relatively small, compact space, right? So something had to inspire that for you to go, this is the solution. This is what riders need.
Yeah. I honestly, back to my TLD days, we had a lawsuit, and this young man would have been injured in anybody's helmet. It wasn't about Troy's helmet, but we had a lawsuit of a young man that did everything wrong and had a life-changing brain injury. And being the GM, I was the person kind of tasked with, not kind of, but tasked with, everything involved with that suit, going to all the depositions and all the hearings and settlement hearings and all that stuff. And it was very uncomfortable, to be honest. It was something I'd never experienced before, and hope I never do again. But it was that event that just stuck in my head. I talked to Troy about after. There's got to be a better way to make a helmet, and the MIPS guys had been out there for a long time talking about the rotational acceleration and their system, and I was aware of that. When I found myself without a job in January of 2011, I just spent some time on my bicycle and by myself. My oldest daughter was getting ready to go to college. She's an engineer now today and works for Lockheed Martin.
Cool.
My youngest daughter was 2 years behind her, and we had a mortgage and a home in Southern California and no income, to speak of. And
That is
my
not a
wife,
good series of events.
yeah, my wife was a substitute teacher, and so there wasn't a lot of income there, and I just basically said, listen, I could go to work for somebody else, but I've got this idea. I think I could get it done. Give me a year. You go get a job, which my wife is amazing. She works here at the company. She does all of the accounting and stuff for us today and has
Nice.
since the beginning. But she went out and got a job at a local real estate a property development company. And then about a year and a half into that, maybe I said, okay, you're coming to work for us, and we just started. That's how we got started. And I was actually on my road bike one day, kind of noodling this problem around. How do we make the helmet better? I just kept coming back to the safety side of our sport and the need for better. And I kind of came up with this thought and idea, and I called Robert. And you guys may or may not be aware of Robert, but Robert Reisinger, my founding partner, he was the founder of Mountain Cycle. And Mountain Cycle was a mountain bike that was years ahead of its time. Monocoque aluminum frame, disc brakes, dual front and rear suspension, and this was back in 89, 90.
Yeah.
And when I met him through a mutual friend when I was out here. We became friends because I had to have one of his bikes, and of course I couldn't afford one at the time, and so by hook or crook, somehow I got one and got going with it. But I called Robert. He had sold his company and he was doing other things. And I said, hey, man, I got this idea and I think I'm going to try and do this. I need some help. What do you think? And he's like, what, are you crazy? You're going to go fight Bell and Shoei and Arai? And I go, well, at least take a look at this. And so I sent him a bunch of stuff to read. I shared my concept, and he called me a week later, thereabouts, and just said, hey, I think you're onto something. Let's try. And that's basically how we got started. We built helmets in my garage out of, old helmets that I had or that we sourced. We went to a lab. David Tom at Collision Injury Dynamics. He's probably the most educated helmet guy in the United States and has recently retired. But I took the original concept in and showed it to him, and it fell apart on his desk. And I think he was like, "Oh, what are you thinking?" Kind of thing. But he directed me to Terry Smith at Dynamic Research and said, you should talk to Terry and have Terry do some testing for you. So we did that. And, those first 2 years, all of that was on my dime. And it was, a big risk because, like I said, I had one going off to college and a mortgage. And, I certainly wasn't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And, but I was just bound and determined that we could do better. And the first thing Terry said to me when we took the prototype in there is like, what are you doing fooling around with motorcycles? You should have this in football and military. And I'm like going, okay, well, yeah, maybe, but I can get it done and I know motorcycles. And so we did some testing. Our results were off the charts good. I mean, we were anywhere, I think our worst numbers were an improvement of 25%. And our best numbers, depending on the impact and what we were looking at, were over 100% better than what we were testing against, which was the Shoeis and Arais and the premium helmets at the time in the marketplace. With that success, I was able to draft a business plan and try to go find some money to get started. And I had told my wife, like I shared before, give me a year. We got funded. We raised $1 million, and got it done in the 11th month. and I'm like, okay, I can write myself a check and we can start working towards building the helmets, further than, the concepts and stuff we had prototyped already. And I don't know, we did 7 or 8 trips to the factory those first years, the 2 years, and, working with them. And, the factories over there, we manufacture in China with a company that's probably not even probably, they are the best quality guys coming out of China. And it's a Taiwanese company. They do great work, but they're not set up to help you fabricate. And I remember going over there and carrying our tools over and getting tools confiscated by the TSA, and, then plugging our electric drills in over there and shorting them out, and, just all the stuff that we learned just trying to get started. I remember we had this end mill that was sitting on the floor, and Robert and I are like, we can't work on that. And we had to get the guys up there and get it up on a bench, and anyways, we had a lot of fun, and it was some experience, but I honestly don't know if we could pull it off again. It was challenging and daunting in a lot of ways. And we had to sell helmets when we started. We basically spent that $1 million by the time we sold our first helmet. And so it was like, we better do a good job or everybody lost their money, Yeah. So anyways, that's the story in a nutshell. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff I'm leaving out.
That's a big nutshell, Bob.
Well, thank you.
I want to make sure we get a chance to cover, because I think a lot of people, when we talk helmets, they hear DOT, ECE, and Snell. And then I've heard you mention FIM, and that's a new standard I'm curious about. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what those mean. So are you able to give us a crash course on what those tests actually signify? Because I think a lot of people say if you have a $100 head, then buy a $100 helmet. But I think that goes deeper than that. You've really alluded to that already.
Yeah, I can give you a lot of insight on that. One, Robert and I and many others at the expert level of helmets are not big fans of the Snell standard. And the reason is the Snell standard has one component that is not really appropriate for a motorcycle accident, and that's 2 strikes in the same location at a high velocity. It's just not a realistic scenario in probably 99.5% of the accidents that might have out there, maybe even 100, who knows, But the point is, it ends up requiring the helmet, in our opinion, to be too stiff at the shell level. And of course, all of the standards, the DOT and the ECE and the FIM, they all have a penetration requirement, as does Snell. I think Snell was unwilling to review. They changed every 5 years, but they weren't coming off of that part of their standard. And I think today, I don't even pay attention to it much anymore, because we've basically determined that a marriage of DOT and ECE gives us the high velocity requirements that we need. It gives us the penetration requirements that we need, and it doesn't require us to overbuild the shell. And if you think about it, if you have a hard shell and a pretty high density EPS layered up against it, and you're impacting something, you have to move that whole surface area is pushing on the EPS, while the whole surface of the skull and head is pushing on the other side. With a lighter shell layup, you've got some oil canning and some flexure going on at that point, and some more work in the concentrated area of the impact. And that's what we want, because the helmets have to be so stiff to pass that high energy demand that on the low energy stuff, they're not doing anything. Will Hahn told me, when we first started with Geico, he's like, I lose the front end and I fall over and I hit my my temple or my forehead on the ground and I'm out cold. And it's like, the reason is the helmet didn't do anything. And he literally said to me at the Vegas final, whatever year that was, that he won the championship, he crashed on the last lap of practice trying to put a heater in. And he hit his head hard. He destroyed a helmet. Wasn't knocked out, was able to continue and won his championship. And he goes, dude, you just saved, or your helmet just saved my championship.
Wow.
I got tons of stories like that.
Yeah.
But back to the standards, you know, everybody always discounted the DOT standard because it was pretty easy to pass. That's true. It hasn't evolved over a lot of years. You know, it is what it is. It's probably not going to, because nobody at the U.S. Department of Transportation is really paying that much attention. The ECE, however, has recently evolved to the 2206 standard, which incorporated a rotational energy management requirement. And those guys are paying attention. It was 20, I want to say it was 14 or 15, we got a call from a young lady named Erica Manfredi, a biomechanical engineer. She was working for the FIM, and she called and she said, okay, I've been tasked by the FIM to develop this new racing standard for motorcycle helmets. I've learned about your technology. I'm very interested in it. I'd like to learn more. We talked for a long time. We ended up going to meet with her in Switzerland. We went to the meetings that they were having with the manufacturers, and 6D was the catalyst for the low energy requirement testing that is incorporated into the FIM. And it is the FIM standard that ECE 2206 basically mirrored for their new standard. So Erica really understood the mechanics of and the biomechanics of a softer, more compliant helmet. And our only thing that we tried those guys to not do was go to 8.2 meters per second on the high end velocity, because it's too high. Truthfully, that accident in the real world, or the equivalent of that accident in the real world, is most likely, and if not definitely, a fatality in a human. So at that stage, you're trying to keep the head and everything together, but you're not going to save the individual, you know? So we're building these helmets to this really high standard that they got to work. But because of that, they're not doing a good job in the 4, 5, 6 meter per second type accidents, which are most common. And that's how and why the ODS system works so well, is we've allowed to soften it up. And we got a lot of pushback on our ATR1. It was a little bit bigger. We had a 6 millimeter air gap in there, and so the helmet was 12 millimeters wider than a regular helmet because of our tech. We've been able to engineer that out of the equation anymore, where we're this, we never hear anything about size anymore. We're the same size as everybody else. And some of the others have gotten a little bigger. I saw a guy at the vet race a couple of years ago in an old Malcolm Smith helmet. I'm like, dude, what are you thinking? I mean, it looked like he was out there with a bicycle helmet on, and he's roosting around on a YZ450F, and with 40 other guys. I'm just like, you're crazy, dude. Go get a new helmet. But anyway, so the standards thing has been really interesting. I love what the FIM did in a lot of ways, because it got the European community to pay attention, and it got everybody to go, hey, we got to address this rotational thing. So today, 15 years later, everybody's building better helmets than they were 15 years ago. Bell, Shoei, Arise building the same helmet. That's a whole nother story. But my point is, technology has given us the ability to build a better mousetrap, and everybody's building better mousetraps today, and that's because these standards evolved. I don't like the cost of the FIM thing. So they made it mandatory in 2026 for off-road competition, anything FIM sanctioned. By October of last year, there was only 2 manufacturers that had homologated helmets, 6D and LS2. And Yeah, and with racing start the Dakar this year,
Right.
we sold helmets to teams and riders all over the world that had to have an FIM, a homologated helmet, and maybe they wore a Liet or maybe they wore a Alpine Star or whatever, and those guys didn't have their helmets done yet. And we had a run on product, which was certainly good for business. We've been chasing our tail to get caught up ever since over in Europe. But the FIM also is not bashful about charging for their homologation, and it's costing the helmets to be more expensive. And for that reason, we make the exact same helmet in the United States, but we don't put the FIM label on it. But that just complicates the buying and the management and the more SKUs, and it's just been crazy. It is what it is. It's a good thing they went down that path. I don't like the way they administer it, but at the end of the day, it has made for better helmets for the marketplace.
That's exciting. Let's pay some bills here real quick. Let's do a quick commercial. And when we get back, I want to talk more about some of the helmet stuff. And then I definitely want to unpack some stuff about the Max Goggle, because I think a lot of people in the adventure space are super pumped for that. So hang with us for 1 second while we go to commercial break here. I wanted to talk about the rebuild program. You kind of hinted at it in the beginning. So if somebody buys a 6D helmet, how does that rebuild program work? Because I think that's also going to be, I don't know how that hinges with lots of people are like, why do I have to replace my helmet every 5 years? So I don't know if those two things are hinged or if that's two different answers.
Well, I'll guarantee you, there's a lot of compromised helmets running around out there that our riders had a pretty good crash in and yielded the EPS at some level, but they continue to wear it because that next helmet's another $400, $500, $600, $800, $900, $1,000 today. I mean, it's crazy. Just the last number of years, the escalation of costs. So when we made the first helmets, the EPS was damaged pretty easily. And I had a guy that wanted to meet Robert and me at Anaheim. And I don't know if he wanted to string us up or just talk to us, but he wasn't happy because he had a brand new ATR1. His kid had a big crash on a brand new KTM 450. He broke the handlebars, the muffler, front fender, just, destroyed the bike and destroyed the helmet. The helmet was torn up. And so we met him there, and he brought the helmet. He had his wife and his son and his daughter, and we're looking at the helmet, and it was torn up also. And I'm like, man, you need to get a new one. He goes, but it was $750. And I go, well, I know, and we'll give you a discount for a crash replacement one, but it did its job. It's a consumable item, and that's what people don't realize. The helmet is a consumable item. And so we ended up, we had the worst thing was somebody that had a brand new one and destroyed it like that because they were bummed. But we ended up starting to rebuild those in the first couple of years, and it really was remanufacturing because I felt bad. I couldn't even afford my own helmet at the time. I was a struggling racer all those years, and so we started rebuilding helmets and charging people $150, I think it was, and they appreciated it. And it took us about, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes to do one, but we would extricate the EPS and put a whole new one in, and put the chin bar back in and clean it all up and glue it back together, and then they were back to good, and they appreciated it. And so when we were starting to work on the development of the ATR2, the second generation helmet, we had a new method for the ODS that was going to take some weight out of the equation, less dampers, less gluing. The ATR1 was really slow on the production line, and that's why the cost was so high. One of the reasons is, they had to glue 54 damper, pieces into the 27 on two sides. Into the helmet liner and then put it all together. So we really spent some time engineering a new method of ODS on the 2, and that's the system that's also a slightly modified version of that in the 3, but it's basically the same design. But with that, we were go, okay, let's make that inside EPS replaceable. And it's super, I mean, it's pretty easy to do, but we can't let the customer do it because we have to know it's back in there properly and secure and built back the way it's supposed to be. But yeah, it's $132 today. Like I said before, the helmet may not look perfect, but if the guy, has a scratch paint, he can put a wrap on it. He can, buy a new visor if the visor got broke, and, fresh set of liner and cheek pads, and he's back to a new helmet, for 150, 60 bucks, whatever it is total, and our customer really seems to appreciate that. They've they appreciate it. We probably do 7 to 10 helmets a week here, on rebuild.
Is there a point where you're like, no, this helmet cannot be rebuilt, dude?
Yeah.
Like, no. I mean, is that like, I don't want to say it this way, but is that like this is a fatality, or like, is it something short of that level of injury?
No, carbon's a fragile material. It's got very high tensile strength, but it doesn't, under loading and point loading and flexure, it'll fracture. The resins are not very pliable, and so we have to really examine the shell well and make sure the shell's not compromised. And a lot of times we'll ask the guy, hey, can you see any fractures on the shell? And he go, yeah, I got a crack here on the chin bar or something. I go, dude, it's done. Or, we tell him, hey, you need to replace that one,
Gotcha.
And that's maybe, I don't know, less than 15% of the time, maybe the shell might be damaged. But I can guarantee you by now, we've seen some really torn up helmets. It's pretty incredible what happens day in and day out around the globe in motocross, and off-road. And really, maybe that's a little bit of a good segue into the goggle. The goggle was we had a kid very early on in the company that got a clutch lever that went between, a clutch lever that went between the helmet eye port edge and the top of the goggle. And it could have killed him. It fractured his skull on the top of the eye socket there. And, he was certainly had a good concussion and all of that, and, spent the night in the hospital, and actually had a titanium mesh screen put in there so that the eye socket could heal back properly. And ever since then, it was like, by now we've seen a lot of broken cheekbones, nose, obviously. And the current crop of goggles with the quick change lenses and everything, they have hard plastic component pieces in them, and riders are getting hit in the face. The helmet can't do anything. You just have a goggle there. Yeah. And the goggle's actually doing damage to the rider's face, facial bones. So the whole idea,
we're getting real video here for, like I said, folks watching on Spotify, the opportunity to actually see some of the helmet stuff. So if you're not doing that, check it out, folks. All right. Bob showed us a new goggle here on the screen.
That's the Max Goggle. It marries or mates perfectly to the helmet. Okay, so it seals all the way around the perimeter. It ducks inside the the chin bar in the front. I don't know if people will be able to see it on here, but inside the nose of the goggle, the nose piece rides like a regular goggle. It lays right on your face, and then on the corners here, it seals to the cheek pads. So all of the dust and the dirt from the bottom can't get in. The rest of it is sealed by the helmet, and then we have the future ATR3s will have come stock with the right foam in the brow vents, but we needed to change this and put a sealing gasket on it to keep dirt from going through the top and getting into that environment, because those vents go right into the brow basically. But anyways, we've resolved all of that. It really changes the experience a little bit. One, you've got this huge theater view that is it's almost 80% more than, I think it's 87% more than a traditional goggle. So you've got this huge view. You've got nothing on your forehead, which is capturing sweat while you're riding and getting saturated. And then you hit a bump and it's all over the inside of your lens. That situation is alleviated. And you've got the same dirt mitigation and control that a regular goggle, every once in a while you get dirt in your regular goggle. Well, you might have that same situation in this goggle. I don't think it's any worse. In fact, I think it's probably better because some goggles have a real problem sealing and keeping the dirt out. So depending on how the goggle fits your helmet and your face, it might be much better. So we launched the goggle in April. It's been pretty crazy. We've been sold out of them twice. We're almost sold out again, but of course, we got a bunch more coming. Riders are really liking them, the comfort and the vision and the airflow. And it just, like I said before, it's a little bit of a different experience from the rider's perspective, and comfort is a lot better. For anybody riding adventure bikes or dual sport bikes or long periods of time off road will love it, because you guys know rolling down the road at 40 miles an hour in a moto helmet with goggles is deafening.
It sucks.
And oh yeah, in this situation, it's quiet. I went to the KTM Adventure Rally in September. And we were on the interstate with just pelting rain. And some of the guys I was riding with were hating life because their noses were getting beat up. And I was happy as a clam, So it's got some real interesting benefits. And full disclosure, we're having a little trouble in certain conditions with some fogging. We're working on that right now. I've got a guy up in Seattle that's been super helpful. He's like, dude, it's so wet up here that I can't overcome I'm not turning the air over fast enough to evacuate the fog. And Freddie had a challenge at one of the supercrosses where he was fogging up a little bit. So Cole and the team, we've been working on that. I think we've got it on the way to being resolved. In fact, right now there's some new lenses coming to us with some different treatments that we should have next week that we can start testing in those environments. But that's one of the things that you just can't test in every environment. And out here in Southern California, it's dry and it's warm, and it does a lot of stuff really great, and then some of those other more humid, cooler temperatures, fog situations, we're not perfect yet. But also, this guy up in Seattle, he says to me, he goes, Bob, my regular goggles fog up too. I take them off, I put them on backwards, So there's not a perfect solution out there yet, but we're working on it. Another little show and tell part for the X, because the X is a different goggle than the R. So on the R, on the sides here, there's just the two louvers there that vent. On the X, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this little lever right here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this lever, what it does is it lifts the shell, it lifts the frame off of the shell. So you could see there's a little, all the way around the goggles off the shell. So that gives you maximum air circulation in there. Helps control the fog or reduce any fogging. Like when I was in Colorado in September, it was working perfectly. It was probably, I don't know, it was probably 60, 65 degrees, and I was in an 890. We're riding trails. I was working hard. I'd start to fog up a little bit. I'd open these up and it'd just clear, it was doing exactly what we wanted it to do, so I was really happy. But, and then you can open that up at a stoplight. All the guys with adventure bikes, they're riding around with the shield open with sunglasses. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Hugely risky. If you're on a 2-track road and you get a rock in the cheek or the eye with sunglasses, you're going to be really, really sorry. Or a stick or a branch or any of that stuff. So what we've done is we've tried to develop a method of still protecting your eyes and your face, but allowing the circulation and the comfort and all the benefits of a goggle, you know? So, so anyways, that was the whole goal of the 3X was build an off-road helmet. We can close the vents off. You know, these vents up top will shut the air down all the way. It's got a different mouth vent here, so you can close in the front. It's got relief cheek pads for sunglasses. You can wear your glass. The Max Goggle works really good with glasses or sunglasses, but you don't have to take it off. You know, like we're working on the OEM over the glasses fit nose piece. But for somebody that can't wait for that, which will be later this year, they can just take a set of shears to it and modify it. And we can tell you how to do that. In 20 minutes, you can have it kind of dialed into your need and where it's not interfering with your glasses at all. And you just go ride, you know?
I was so happy to see you wearing eyeglasses, and I've been waiting for like 5 minutes to ask you how that was. I'm not wearing them now, but I wear eyeglasses, and it's a new thing to me, Bob. Within the last couple of years, I had to start wearing prescription glasses because I ain't getting any younger. Yep. And I'm like, man, I wear an Orion XD4 right now, so you're sitting here selling me on a helmet, basically. But I've tried other helmets, and with eyeglasses, it's, as you know, it's such a thing. Like some helmets, I'm loving this particular helmet over here, but it just doesn't work with eyeglasses, you know?
Yeah. I'm in the same boat you are. I've been wearing glasses now for 12 years. And for the first 2 years of development on this, I had sports glasses that I wore with my motobike. And before I was working on this, I would just go and ride with fuzzy vision. But then I got glasses I could wear. But then about 2 years ago, I got contacts I'm riding with contacts now that is working really good for me. But I prefer my progressives if I'm at work or if I'm working on something in the garage or in the back or whatever, because I don't have to switch back and forth, But
I get it.
But yeah, it sucks getting old. I can promise you that.
It's better than the alternative, which is what my dad always says, right?
True.
I wanted to double check on one thing with the Max Goggle, and then I think we're going to have to transition to the bonus loop with the subscribers here real quick. So if you're an adventure or dual sport rider, I assume that the Max Goggle is going to mean that you get more ventilation like you would normally get with a normal goggle, but more of the protection with a standard helmet. So is it, when you compare ventilation versus, we'll say, cold weather tolerance, where does the Max Goggle helmet setup fit between a traditional motocross style helmet or a traditional adventure helmet with a full visor?
Well, I can tell you, in a traditional adventure helmet with a visor, a shield, you got nothing to keep the dust out. They want you to put a goggle on and then close the lens, or run it with a goggle over with the shield up. So compared to a adventure helmet, I think for the real true off-road guy that's going to be off-road more than on-road, he's going to love this solution. In the ventilation department, I think it's better than a regular goggle. I just sent a set to Keith Johnson up in Southwick and said, hey, I'm a little worried about the sand. I want to get some, pre-Southwick before the guys get their evaluation. And he's like, okay, send me, I sent him a couple of sets, and he made a post. He goes on his Instagram, he said, hey, these are pretty cool. I expected them to be hot. They weren't. The ventilation was as good or better than my regular goggles. No dirt in them. He was pretty stoked. And
nice.
I think, and that takes me back to Dubach, he was really the true inspiration, because the one that he wrote in the beginning was really Cobby, of course. And he could see past that. He was probably the best guy with all the development work he did over the years with Yamaha, that he could see past this what it looked like and just evaluate it. But he goes, dude, the amount of airflow is just refreshing. So it's a different animal. It's like the best way I can explain it, Drew, is it definitely changes the experience, and I think for the better. Less fatigue, more comfort, more vision, more safety. And you just got to set it up a little bit before you use it the first time. Make sure you got the right nose piece, make sure you got the vents and the gasket in there, and you're off and running.
We got a lot of guys that race adventure bikes that are in this community that are listening to the show or associated with the show. So I imagine they're going to be super stoked. Safer helmet, racing a big fat bike with more vision than a traditional goggle. I think they would be stoked about that for sure. Before we transition to the subscriber section, if folks are looking for 6D helmets, where's the best place to find you and find the helmets?
Well, obviously, we're at 6dhelmets.com. We're in Southern California here, North Orange County. We're at a lot of dealers. The big mail order guys are, the Rocky Mountains and Motorsports and Chappie and just, all those guys are good customers of ours. And then we've got a lot of shops around the country that are now stocking our product, and so if your dealer doesn't have 6D, they can order it, or you could go to the website and just order direct also. That's we're here to support that as well.
Subscribers, hang with us. If you're not a subscriber, just a reminder to everybody, $1 a month, and you can get the backstage pass to the bonus loop we're headed into right now. So with that, we'll catch the regular listeners down the road and check in with the subs.